I'd like to move on to our panel discussion. I'm going to introduce my friends who will be joining us today. First up will be Chanel Blanchett. Chanel is a theater artist dedicated to engaging underrepresented audiences and creating space for diverse voices. Since 2013, Chanel has been a teaching artist here at Children's Theater of Charlotte, as well as a freelance director and choreographer, working with a range of organizations to create community connections through theater. Chanel is currently an MFA theater candidate at Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York. Chanel, hello, my friends, welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm so happy to have you. Next on the panel is Charlitta Hatch. Charlitta is a wife, mom, and author, and she also works as a business change agent with Slalom. Her role as president of the Junior League of Charlotte, Charlitta boldly leads their 1,600 member organization, which is focused on volunteerism, developing women, and improving the community. And also, as an author, Charlitta is passionate about changing the narrative of young Black boys in America through her organization called Me3 Project and her book, Black Boy Joy. Hello, Charlitta.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, my friend. 3 more to go. Jasmine Leola Mary Lennon is our next panelist. Jasmine is a rising 4th grader at Sugar Creek Elementary School in Fort Mill, South Carolina. Jasmine recently developed a passion for social justice in light of the events surrounding the murder of George Floyd. Jasmine, or Jazzy, as she is affectionately called, she led a neighborhood demonstration to bring awareness to Black Lives Matter and the importance of unity in her community. Jasmine's campaign gained both local and national attention because she was one of the youngest children in the nation to lead a protest. Jazzy, thank you for being here, my friend.
You are so welcome, and I'm also so happy to be here.
All right, wonderful to have you. Our next panelist is Tarik Sloussi. Tarik is a licensed clinical mental health counselor in the state of North Carolina. His areas of expertise include anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, anger management, and life transition struggles, especially among adolescents and young adult men. Tarik is a native of Casablanca, Morocco, and he's lived in Florida, Georgia, and now in North Carolina. Tarik, welcome, friends.
Hey there, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are more than welcome. Thank you for being here. And then last but certainly not least is my friend and colleague, Darius Smalls. Having 7 years of experience in library services for children and teens, Darius has made a career of engaging youth and families in Center City, Charlotte. As a teen, he volunteered as a youth martial arts instructor, as well as with the Charlotte Meck Library here at ImaginOn. And Darius's passion for libraries started when he was just a child growing up in the New York Public Library. He grew up in the Bronx. He's a crowd favorite, one of my favorites for leading baby and family story times in the Spangler Library here inside of ImaginOn. And that's a part of the library designated for children from birth to 5th grade. And Darius, I want to say hello and welcome, my friends.
Thank you for having me, Arlethia.
You are more than welcome. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy Saturdays to join us. I think, though, this is a really good reason for us to be together. There is a lot to talk about, and I hope you don't mind sharing your thoughts and opinions with our audience today. So to get started, I just want to say one of the biggest takeaways for me after reading the book and watching the play is that what we really need to do is to normalize talking about race, right? So for decades since the civil rights movement, as a society, we have really made it taboo to talk about race. It's really hush hush. It's like rude if you talk about race. And we like to believe that we live in a post-racial society, but I'm not quite sure that's true. Charlitta, I'm going to start with you. You wear many, many hats, and you operate in a lot of different spaces with lots of different people. Do you find it difficult to get people to talk about race openly and honestly?
Honestly, I do. And I think it's because we haven't become comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think because there's so much unknown about different parts of different races, and people are afraid to say the wrong things, so we just don't talk about it. And in most of my life, outside of going to an historically Black college and university, I have been what I would call kind of the only in the room, and being in that space.
Yeah.
And so I have felt at times people didn't know how to interact with me, and I didn't know how to interact with them. Sometimes I would feel things that like happened in the play to Jelani, but I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to feel it. And I felt that people might say that I'm making it up, or that it's not happening, or it didn't happen to them. And so my message would be, we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, but then we also have to use our voice. No matter how old we are, we should tell our parents, we should tell our teachers, we should tell somebody what we're feeling so they can help us, navigate through those different experiences.
Absolutely. And you're right. Sometimes it is just a feeling, right? And as a person of color, we're often told we are playing the race card or making things up. But you know what you know what you're feeling. As a Black person, honestly, I have to say that I feel empowered by talking about race. I am Black, and I am proud. But a lot of times I feel like when things are happening, you might be having a conversation or in a situation with somebody, race is kind of the elephant in the room, but people won't talk about it, even among other Black people. Do you find that to be true, that even among not just other Black people, but people of other colors, that sometimes even we are hesitant to have those conversations?
Yes, and I think it's two different reasons. I think when you are, showing up in spaces where, there are multiple people represented, so people of color and white people, you feel empowered because now you're like, oh, we're addressing the elephant in the room, just like any other topic. And so you feel comfortable and empowered. But I think when we are around people of color, it's almost like I have to deal with it so much that this is the space where I don't want to talk about it, even though it should almost be one of the safest spaces. It's like, I don't want to have to talk about it here. And because we don't practice talking about it at home, with kids, and at school, then we don't know actually how to show up and do it when it's not just us. It's very complicated.
Absolutely. I also think, as you said, it can be for different reasons, that very often we don't often find ourselves in positions of power, right? So if we are on our job, we don't want to be seen as that person who is the troublemaker or the person who's bringing up something that nobody else wants to talk about. Very often, it feels like if we just stay quiet, keep to ourselves and not stir the pot, the racism pot, or just the race pot, even without the ism, that will be seen as more acceptable, that people can get along with us better. And sometimes that's really what we seek to do, unfortunately. Let me see. I have some questions from our viewers, but I also have a couple of other things. I don't know if you guys all agree, but a lot of times it feels to me like by not talking about race, we turn race into a bad thing. Race is not inherently bad, right? But we can turn conversations about race or our various races into insults, right? Words like Black or Mexican, though that is not a race, it can be used as an insult. Even other descriptors like our gender, the word girl can become an insult. You hit like a girl, you fight like a girl, that kind of thing. In the play, in one of the songs called Brown Skin, Jelani says, I'm questioning my Black pride and what I look like. I want to fit in, but I can't because of the color of my skin. Jasmine, do you notice differences between yourself and other kids or other people in general?
Well, no, I don't.
Okay.
Because Jelani said in the play, it is actually good to be different. So no.
Yeah, fantastic. It is good to be different. Jazzy, there is a question from one of the viewers. Her name is Maya, and she wants to know, what inspired you to do your protest?
So, what inspired me is, first I caught something on the news, and it inspired me to do my own. and my mom was like, no, because I just wanted to do it at first because I saw people on TV doing it. But then my grandfather was crying, and that's what also inspired me, and also because of the death of George Floyd.
Wow. So your mom said no at first. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes. What made her change her mind? Do you know?
Well, yes, because when she said no, that's when I was like, okay. So I actually pushed her and said, no, I want to do this demonstration. And then she's like, okay, right after my grandfather was caught crying.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad that you persisted. I really am. Tarik, we have a question for you from one of our viewers, and this is from Ellington. He's 9.5 years old, and he asks, if a friend has a bad comment about my race, what should I do?
That's a great question. It's a tough one to answer, right? Because as kids, we don't want to have bad interactions with our friends. But as Charlitta mentioned earlier, we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's if that's truly your friend, then you can share with him how you feel. Like the play says, we have all of these feelings, and if someone cares about you, they care about your feelings. And if you hurt their feelings, I would challenge Ellington to share. It's actually a her. I actually know Ellington, so.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. My apologies.
So Ellington, I would challenge you to have a conversation with your friend and just share with them how what they've done has hurt you and how it's made you feel. And if they care about you, they'll understand and try to change their behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a question that a couple of you could answer. What do you say when you hear or see someone doing something racist, especially if they are someone you don't know? That can be really scary. It's hard to insert yourself into a situation. Have any of you borne witness to anything like this, had an experience like this? Yes. Darius, you have anything you want to share with us?
It's hard just being put on the spot in that sense, but I'll probably think of one.
Sure, no worries at all. I think too, it really depends on, yes, go ahead, Charlitta.
I was going to say, depending on the age and kind of the atmosphere and the environment you're in, I'm going to think that if most of us are probably under the age of 13, we might be with an adult or a grown up, we can say that's not nice because that's not disrespectful. And then we can kind of have a conversation with the adult that we're with, so that adult can kind of help articulate to that person that was exhibiting that racist behavior, and you can see them and how they handle that situation, and the next time you will be able to do it. I would definitely say that it is okay to say that's not nice, and then make sure that the adult you're with knows why that's not nice.
Thank you for that suggestion. Absolutely a good way to speak your truth, but also keep yourself safe. Thank you, Charlitta. Another really good question that I'm sure many of us have had to deal with, and that is, how can you deal with racism in school when you are the only Black kid in your class? That's a tough one, right? I've been there, and it is not easy. Yeah. Anyone want to tackle that question? I would ask, yes, go ahead, Jasmine.
Well, it's hard being the Black kid in the class because, like in the play, the main character said it's hard to fit in, but it's hard to fit in because like when you're the only one that cannot fit in, it makes you feel ashamed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It feels like your differences are magnified, right? Like everybody can see them. It's hard being the only anything. It's hard being the only woman in a situation when you are around all men, or vice versa, right? That is very difficult. Chanel, I wonder if you've had similar situations being in theater, being a Black woman in theater. Have you been in circumstances like that?
Yes, quite often. Typically, I'm one of the only, if not the only, person of color, definitely Black women in the room, in a lot of the environments that I've worked in, or theater environments where I've been directing. And so it's really tough. I think for me, what's been really important is to, I think Charlitta was talking about this earlier, is speak my truth. And then also get comfortable myself with being uncomfortable, because I think sometimes we don't want to rock the boat, but rocking the boat shouldn't dissuade you from saying your truth and speaking your feelings. And so for me, that's a process for sure, but doing that kind of internal work to figure out how I can stand in my truth and empower myself, but also knowing that when we don't want to call people out, we want to call them in. And so I think that you're opening a discussion to what it feels like and sharing your feelings. And so focusing on sharing my feelings in those spaces instead of maybe assuming why someone said something, looked at me this way, things like that. Sharing my feelings, and then based on the response, having a dialogue about it that makes it easier the next time we're in the space.
You just dropped a gem on us. We don't want to call people out. We want to call them in. Thank you for that. And that is conviction for me. So thank you so much. I don't want to stay on this same question for too long, but I do think it's really important. Tarik, will you talk a little bit about using counselors as a resource at the school level for a child who may be in this particular situation?
Yes, I think counselors in the school level can be a great resource, but I think representation is important as well, right? So if we can get Black and brown counselors for Title I schools that need, this is important this is an important factor in that. But yes, counselors are trained to care for children's mental and emotional health, and this is an emotional and mental health issue, right? It's a form of bullying. So, and just acculturation, assimilation, the pressure that you feel as a kid trying to, be yourself, but also not following the majority or the norm, that's hard. And for kids being malleable and wanting to fit in, identity development and not wanting to be outcast, being social beings, it can be really tough. So you need mentorship, you need support, you need people that can step up and who have voices and can use them. And I think that's our white peers as well. If you have a best friend that is white, how do they step in? Because that privilege, right? If they can use that privilege and say, hey, that's not cool. I think that can.
Absolutely. Thank you. A couple words that Tarik used: acculturation, assimilation, I think are words that are really important for the parents who are watching to research and talk with your young people about them. Jasmine, I just want to share one last thing with you, and that is from Greta, who is 4 years old. She wants you to know that it is cool that you helped your community, and I would agree with Greta on that. Are there, Darius, I want to go to you. Are there any good books that you would recommend for families to read together on this topic in particular?
I can definitely think on a couple good ones. There's a book series by Rita Garcia Williams, Gone Crazy in Alabama. It's probably on a higher grade level.
Okay.
But that's just a good perspective into, especially here in the South and everything, kids understanding their being Black, just kind of in this area, in this time. That's more of a chapter book. For families, there are plenty of picture books. And I could probably suggest authors like Angela Johnson, or even Rachel Isadora. Some of her books would be real good books for kids who are preschool or kindergarten age, and just something to read that would add representation. And a lot of times parents ask me for books that provide representation of kids who are Black and brown, as opposed to the majority of books, with, white characters, or even characters who are male characters. It's good to have a diversity so that kids can make that connection and see themselves in these stories, or see themselves in different possibilities and be able to have a better scope of what their potential really is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Darius. Even as young as babies, there are board books. This, the Anti-Racist Baby, you know, you can start super, super young. Tarik, did you have something you wanted to add?
There's another book that I came across recently. It's called Something Happened in Our Town, and it's written by 3 psychologists, and it's written for ages 4 to 8. And it talks about police brutality in particular, so it's very relevant to what's going on today.
Thank you so much for that. Also, we do have some resources on our website for the past several weeks in our e-blast and on our social media. We have shared many resources, podcasts, books, and others. So please take a look at the Children's Theater of Charlotte website as well. This one is a really hard question that comes from 9-year-old Emma asking, why does racism happen? Man, that's so hard.
It's too.
What's that, Jasmine?
I was asking that in my mind.
Yeah, like why does this happen? Yeah, it's so hard to know, right? Why it happens, and I'm sorry to keep calling on you so much, Tarik, but I'm hoping that you can help us break down the mental and emotional aspects of why these things even come up. We know that it's not inherent in us as humans, right? We aren't born this way, but what happens and when does it happen? How does it happen?
Yeah, so as you stated, it's a learned behavior to a large extent, right? It's modeling. Kids pay more attention to what you do than what you say. So if you're saying I love everyone, but then you're not behaving in that fashion, kids pick up on that. So that's a part of it. Is that's the reason why racism may evolve. But honestly, another part of racism has to do with feelings of threat to your position, right? So if you're the majority and someone else is a minority, literally and figuratively, that feels like a threat and you don't want to give up. So the irony in what's going on in our society today is white people are feeling like Black people are trying to pull them down, or people of color are trying to pull them down. We're not trying to knock you off of anything. We're trying to be equal. We're trying to come up. Yeah. So that's the visual aid that gets missed. And it was pretty profound when I stumbled upon it. It's for white people, us coming up, people of color coming up actually feels like them coming down. But that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for coming up. So it's twofold. One, it's learned behavior. And then 2, it feels like a threat because it feels like we're losing something. Indeed. And again, you have to teach kids how to share. So if you're losing something, sharing is hard. And so that's a part of it as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. So many really good questions that I want to get to. 10-year-old Hank has a question for you, Jazzy. He wants to know, have you had people be mean to you at school?
Well, not at school, but one time I went to this I went to a Girl Scout club, and they didn't really treat me fair because the color of my skin. So yes, but just not at school.
Not at school, but you have experienced that, and how terrible that this little baby already, so young in her life, is already experiencing racism. This isn't the kind of thing that our children should have to deal with at such a young age. Another question, what can teachers do to help create an inclusive classroom? And this is, I want to say this on behalf of the Gantt, that the Gantt Center offers training for teachers called Gantt Teacher Institute. They can visit the ganttcenter.org for more information on that. Anybody else have recommendations for what teachers can do to make all children feel welcome and included in their classrooms?
I do.
Yeah, please.
Charlitta, did you want to go?
No, please, you go first.
Cool. For me, I found, especially since I teach kind of like a visual and in-person medium normally, is that having resources like books and plays and TV shows and music from people from all different backgrounds is a way to make sure that you are not only making it clear that like equality and equity is something that we should all strive for, but also for students from those backgrounds, it gives them an opening to have discussions about their culture and their thoughts and minds and what their family life is like. And then that can spark a discussion with other students in class. That can become a really cool way to create connections. And then when something does come up that is racist or harmful, always creating space to have that conversation and for the follow-up because I think sometimes, especially as teachers, we want everything to kind of like stay fun and cool for everybody. But sometimes it's really important to take that pause to be like, we have to have a really serious moment. Let's talk about it and follow up about it, to make sure that people understand and that if they have any concerns, they can follow up.
Thank you. Really important that everybody is normal. Though we're different, we are all normal. Charlitta, I know that you had something you wanted to add as well. Please go ahead.
I don't know how many people will remember McDonald's commercial when they started their campaign with Black History 365.
Yeah.
And that was really like revolutionary for me. And I'm like, I can celebrate Black history myself more than just February. And I think if we can get our teachers and our schools to infuse, celebrations of all different cultures beyond just the month, and really challenging, to Chanel's point about the books that we read and our history lessons and how does our math problems read, and even our fun activities, how do we make sure that there's diversity infused throughout, the days in the week beyond just the month that's allocated. I think that's a controllable and actionable step that our educators could take.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Charlitta. Another question for you, Tarik. Someone asks, you are from Morocco. You were born in Morocco, but then you spent most of your life here in the United States. When you and I chatted, you used the word ethnically ambiguous in terms of your personal appearance, your physical appearance. This person wants to know, what has your experience been like being an African American who does not look the way many people expect African Americans to look?
I appreciate that question because I don't get that asked too often, right?
Okay.
There's assumptions, you're mixed. So it depends on where I'm at. So again, I was in Morocco till I was 6 and then moved to Florida, grew up in Florida all the way through high school, came to Charlotte for college, went to Atlanta for grad school, came back. So my experiences in those different states are all somewhat different. So in Central Florida, it's very diverse and very heavy Latin American population. So my closest friends are Puerto Rican, Dominican, Haitian, all the islanders. So somebody got to about that. So for me there, I didn't feel much racism, so to say. You see it at school, with some diverse populations, but then I go to Charlotte, North Carolina, and Charlotte's very heavy white, Black, and Mexican, and that's it. So people just put me in the box of like, oh, you're probably mixed. So it's interesting. We'll get to the microaggression stuff, but it's like, oh, you're an attractive guy, or you're an articulate guy, and it's just like, what does that mean? Do you not expect that from someone of
very interesting? Yeah.
So it's interesting because I have my own culture. Like Morocco is 99% Muslim and Arabic, right? So I am my own. I am African American, but it's a very interesting piece because watching the play, talking about racial ambiguity, that's something that I've almost owned, But it's interesting because that play had me reconsidering it all. It's like, hold on.
Right.
Is there a racial undertone there? Is there a microaggression within that? So I'm reflecting on that a little bit more. But as kind of answering the original question about what my experience is, I feel like a fly on the wall because I feel like I'm accepted in most groups because if I'm with my Latin American friends, people assume I'm Latin American. If I'm with my Black friends, people assume I'm mixed and I'm Black. But then if I'm with my white friends, it's like, oh, well, you're still okay. You're not, your pigment is not too dark. And there's that, the darker the pigment, the more the judgment sometimes. So that's unfortunate, but that is a part of the experience. So for me, my experience is a fly on the wall, but yet not fully accepted. But then in the same token, people will say things around me that they probably shouldn't because they don't think that I fall into that category. So it's a very interesting experience, to say the least. Much more I can say.
Yeah, interesting to say the least. Thank you. Another vocabulary word, parents, microaggression. Look that one up, and hopefully we'll have some time to kind of dice that one up at the end of our discussion. Thank you so much, Tarik. Another good question, how can we empower ourselves and feel confident as children? Children are so used to being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to go. How can they feel confident in themselves? and empower themselves in terms of their own race and fighting racism. Anybody want to jump in here with that one? Yes, Miss Jasmine, go ahead.
I want to jump into that because like I have a special response to racism because like I just don't, because like remember the question that was being asked earlier, that why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
And like my opinion, if nobody answered it, my opinion is really that I think it's because it's just that white people get disgusted by it for some reason, because like they're not used to being around, because some of them just really want to make the word different look bad, maybe.
Indeed. Jasmine, you are very confident, obviously, in yourself. Where does that come from? Do you know? Is it something your parents taught you? Do you feel like that's just who you are? Where did that come from?
Well, I think it came from well, when I first when I first heard about racism, and when I heard that different is actually good, I actually wanted to, achieve to that, because I'm actually reaching for to end racism.
Mm-hmm.
So actually it came from, I don't actually know where it came from. I think it just came from, watching other people being confident.
Okay, fantastic. Charlitta, in writing Black Boy Joy, go ahead. I was going to say, I'm sure you have something on this, my friend. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to actually direct the answer towards the parents for 2 seconds. I think for our white parents that are on, I think to really get your kids confident with being around other people that do not look like them,
Mm-hmm.
You have to be intentional about your exposure, right? And so you start thinking about what schools are your kids in, what books are they reading, what music are they listening to, what restaurants do you go to? We really should be challenging our white parents to help build that inclusive culture in the household so that they can transcend to the schools. And then I think to our people of color parents that are on, we spend so much of our time teaching our kids how to survive. We do not teach them how to thrive.
Yeah.
I think we have to teach survival, because we would be remiss if we did not. But we also need to figure out how we teach our kids to thrive in the culture, so in different cultures, so that they can be more confident in being who they are. And survival should not be hiding who you are.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. A couple more, and then I do want to have that conversation about microaggressions before we go. Racism is clearly a taught behavior, one of our viewers says. At what age do we see children exhibiting this type of behavior? How early on do we see this? Yeah, Darius, you have something?
Yeah, that one's a really good one, because where I work at in the library, and kind of my experience growing up in Charlotte definitely kind of points to a couple parts. One, for my early elementary and preschool kids, you can definitely see that they don't have a concept of the differences of color or race as their parents might. And I'll give this example, maybe during a program or story time, at least as we used to know them earlier last year. when we would have 50, 100 parents or so, and of course they'll congregate and talk to each other. But at the same time, parents, they'll congregate with who they know. They'll talk to who they know, they're good friends. And normally that means that, the white parents, they'll normally most comfortably congregate with the white parents. And of course, the black parents, they'll congregate together and things. But you'll notice their kids don't care if they come and jump over somebody's lap to go play another color of kids, or even different ages. I mean, it could be a 7-year-old kid playing with 3-year-old kids of a different race, but none of those differences matter because they have not learned those yet. But then also as kids get older, and I normally say kids as they get towards maybe 5th grade and up, that's when they start to have more of the social needs. And I also get to see that too, because I work a lot with preteens. So preteens, you first start to see their little cliques and things. And a lot of it seems to be kind of brought on by school, and they'll tell you what's cool, what's not cool, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And then you have, who makes those rules? Who's going to be the leader? Who is going to follow, who makes those rules, and who's going to be accepted and who's going to be left out. So that happens all the time in the library. And also, my experience, because I started school here when I was in middle school, that's when I really started to feel it and the dynamic changed for me. And I started to be very aware of my race when I was in Charlotte, starting middle school here.
Thank you. Chanel, would you agree with that? Is that about the same thing that you see in teaching young people theater, or do you see it any earlier or perhaps later?
It's really interesting because I think, as Darius was saying, younger kids, their sense of boundaries are really different. So in that sense, like, kids don't hesitate to crawl over each other and things like that, but kids are also really honest. And so sometimes, like when I've been teaching kids who were 6, 7, around that age, they'll say something, I notice that they're more likely to maybe call a certain child loud, or they'll kind of be really curious about the way another student talks. And I think for them, it's just whatever their learned behavior is at home. When someone else exhibits behavior that's different, they have questions about it. Yeah. And sometimes with kids, it just comes out of like, oh, you're really loud. And so I would say at that point, it doesn't read as racism, but if a particular student, and this has happened, tends to maybe always say that a Black student is really loud in a way that the volume from another student might not be interpreted that way. It then becomes a wondering of like, okay, well, let's talk about volume levels. And so I think it's maybe in younger kids, it's just behavior that's outside of what they're used to. And if they grow up in a mostly single race environment, then it becomes kind of unintentionally racist, because it's just about, I think what we've been all talking about is differences. But then, like Darius was saying, in that like 5th grade, when then you start to have the language to describe what it is, then I think it's easier to put its finger on.
I think most of what we see in our day-to-day is unintentionally racist, but it's still racist. Yeah. One last question, and then I want to have a conversation with you guys about microaggressions. I'm so happy that our viewers have so many questions and comments. This question, I'm not sure who posed it, but it says, at what age is it appropriate to start having conversations with your children about race? My parents did not talk with me about race, so I have no point of reference. And I'll bet that's true for a great many of people. Tarik and Charlitta, I want to pose that question to the two of you. At what age would you say it's appropriate? And I would assume that in talking about race, it's just like any other difficult topic. You have to speak appropriately for the age group. But when can we first start having those conversations? Tarik, you want to take it first?
Ladies first. I'll let Charlitta if she's ready.
All righty.
So I would say, and to qualify myself, I have a 3-year-old. And so I think you should have age-appropriate conversations to talk about differences. So this week, it popped into my head. I said, do you think mommy's beautiful? Yes. What color is mommy's skin? Brown. What color is mommy's eyes? What color is mommy's hair? What color is your skin? What color is daddy's skin? What about your teacher? And so I think it doesn't have to be a heavy, so son, you're Black in America, but we can talk to our kids about the beauty of differences. And maybe that changes the narrative about race as we're building the next generation, is that we are celebrating the differences and excited about it, and excited about their different friends in their classrooms and their teachers and at the store. And it's not a bad thing, but it's a good thing. And I see it as my duty as a mom to highlight those differences, but to make them good and not bad.
Thank you. Thank you. Starting even as young as age 3. Tarik, what did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I would co-sign everything Charlitta said and what you articulated as well, Arlethia. It's really about age-appropriate conversations, but acknowledging those things. Like as Jasmine said, she's learning things from the news and seeing things. So you assume kids don't know, but they are sponges. They pay attention to what goes on, even at the tender age of 3. You know, kids are able to see the difference. You know, they see their mom's face and they can tell that that's their mom's face, and they can see that someone looks different. But you're not going to see the overt racism until a little bit later, as Darius and Chanel have articulated. But I think we need to talk about it. It needs to be normalized, just like the sex talk or the drug talk or the talk that you have as an African American about, you know, what you do if you're pulled over by a cop. You know, that's not appropriate till it gets closer to that time where your kid's out of your reach. But, you know, throughout those younger years, they're around you 100%, if not 99% of the time, so you can protect them. But you don't just kind of throw them into the deep end. You got to prepare them age-appropriate conversations as that time comes.
Indeed, indeed. One of the last things I want to talk about is microaggressions. And so in the play, Jelani says it can be a word, a thought, a question. Those really small acts of racism are called microaggressions. Tarik, can you give us a few examples of what a microaggression might look like?
Yes, no, definitely. I think when most people think of microaggressions, they think of the obvious microaggressions, the more overt. It's almost like focusing on the word aggression. It's like, hey, you're smart for a Black girl, but no, just erase the Black girl part and just the surprise that I'm smart. Hey, you're smart, as if you're surprised. So it can be more covert than overt in that regard. Or you're attractive, as I said earlier. Or do you play basketball or do you play football? Why do I have to be an athlete just because I may have an athletic frame? You know, so there's these associations. So there's a lot of examples, but I think the thing about microaggressions is that they're hidden, and I wouldn't say hidden because that shows intentionality, right? So there's not intentionality behind it sometimes. It's just, it's ignorance, which by definition is a lack of knowledge and awareness. And if you haven't studied history and oppressed people and calling an African-American male boy, you don't do that. But that's, what do you mean? Boy is just a normal vocabulary word. So there's a lot there, but they come in the form of compliments sometimes, you're smart, or in the form of jokes. Like, oh, wow, you're pretty tall for a Mexican, right? Or, oh yeah, are you cutting the lawn later? Like, no, that is a micro, even if you're joking, that's still a micro. So they get hidden under compliments and jokes, but they're inappropriate.
And to me, I feel like a lot of times microaggressions can even do more damage than bigger, more blatant acts of racism. Am I crazy? Like, is that even possible?
Yeah, I feel that too. I think because if someone is blatantly racist, then I can write that person off or write that situation off as like, I was never gonna change that person's mind or anything like that. But with microaggressions, often, at least in my experience, they come from people who I'm friends with, or they're my teachers, or they're my coworkers. And so they're people that in my head, I had a sense of security about. And then, you know, oh, your hair looks like Sideshow Bob's, or like, oh, something like that. And then it's, you know, kind of this record scratch moment. So I do think it is harder when they're microaggressions. And like someone in the chat asked about like racism between Black people. And I feel like prejudice between like people of the same race, I think, for me, is where microaggressions and that kind of nuanced, like maybe you're not Black enough, maybe you're not this enough, comes into play. And also because I think people who are of the same race feel this sense of fictive kinship or this sense of connection because we're all in this life and this particular struggle together. Microaggressions then can also feel particularly harmful because we feel this tie and this tether. And in those situations, I think it's hard.
Absolutely. If you are one of 2 Black girls in your class and the other Black girl suddenly thinks that you aren't Black enough, that's especially hurtful, right? Tarik, you generally work with adolescents, so children who are a little older than the character that Jelani is in the play. How do acts of racism that children experience, say, in elementary school, then impact them later as teens and as young adults later on in their lives?
Great question. So it can impact them in a multitude of ways, right? So self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence, those are the big 3, right? That all fall under a specific bubble. But that's why, as it says in the play, we need to build our kids up. And as Charlitta's book states, Black Boy Joy, it's talking about these kids in a positive light, right? Because if they're going to get this, I connect it to, like, from a mental health lens, we have about 50,000 thoughts per day. 40,000 of those thoughts are negative and 10,000 are positive. So we're already working an uphill battle naturally, just from like a psychological lens. But now if the world around you, if the majority around you see you as less than, then it's just compounding the negativity, right? So you have to balance it out. So, but going back to your original question, how can it impact them? It can impact their self-esteem, their self-worth, and their self-confidence. It can also impact them from a security and anxiety, fear, right? I don't feel safe, right? It's the lady that I get in the elevator with who clutches her purse. She's worried about me, but I'm equally worried about her. Just like the I forget her name, and please someone jump in if you know, but the Central Park situation where
Amy Cooper. Mm-hmm.
Amy Cooper, that situation, it impacts them in that way. They're afraid of the majority because they don't know how their word has more power than mine. So therefore, if she says that I did something, it's my word against hers, and her word has more power. And that's another way it can impact them. So self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, and then also just fear and anxiety about walking through life.
Yeah. Experiences with racism really can, early on, can impact the entire rest of your life, unfortunately. We have really gone much longer than we said that we would, but we have so many wonderful questions from our audience, and I want to thank you all so much for that. Before the last thing we wrap up with, I just want to say that the play is still available for streaming on demand through Broadway On Demand, so you can watch it as many times as you would like, today and tomorrow. It is available for free. We really hope that this is just a starting off point. Please don't let this be the first and last conversation that you have with your children, with your family, with each other, with your communities about race and racism. It is so important, so we need to continue these conversations. Early in the play, there's a line that says, racism is like a virus. And we wouldn't allow a virus, a disease, an illness of any kind to continue to grow unchecked in our bodies. So we can't allow the virus of racism to go unchecked in our community. Each of us, everyone has a responsibility to diagnose the virus of racism, like to call it out when you see it, call a thing, and to fight it until it dies. Charlitta, as the president of the Junior League of Charlotte, which is the organization that founded Children's Theater of Charlotte back in 1948, I would like for you to have the last word, please, ma'am. Both of our organizations have gone through incredible evolutions over the past several decades, and both organizations are dedicated to serving our communities. Why is it important for all of us to use our platforms to take a stand against racism?
And I think the key word here is all. Because all of us have different seats and different lenses that we are able to kind of amplify the voices from. And there are things that, I challenge, a lot of our white counterparts that they can say to their white counterparts. And there are things, frankly, that I can say to the people of color community. And so I think it's critical that if we know the next generation is watching, because they're on this play right now. And so if we do not make it comfortable to have uncomfortable conversations, 20 years from now, somebody's going to be here with the part 2 of a kid's play about racism, and they're going to be having the same conversation. So I think first and foremost, it's important because the next generation is watching. They're learning what we do, how we have those conversations, how we interact with each other, are we just saying what we're saying right here on this call? Or are we actually going to now go out and model out what it means to build an inclusive community? And so we have to do it for our children. We have to.
We have to do it for our children. Jasmine had one last thing she wanted to say. Yes.
So in the play, Janine, before the end, Janine said the next time you see someone being all this, all that, call it racism. But I think also, instead of just calling it racism, also go over there and help them.
Yes, absolutely. Reach out, absolutely. Thank you so much to all of my panelists today. You all have been absolutely amazing. You are wonderful. Thank you once again to my partners at the Harvey B. Gantt Center. To Charlotte, thank you. We love you. And until next time, see you again.
Bye, guys.
Everybody, bye.